As most of you can probably tell, I'm quite tall. And for most of my life, I've been answering this question: do you play basketball? And every time I feel like I'm disappointing them and I tell them, no, I don't play basketball. But I do redeem myself because for a long time, I was a competitive swimmer. I started swimming when I was about 9 or 10 years old. And although I didn't love the sport at first, by the age of about 15, it really grew on me. I love all the challenges that it brought into my life. I make some great friends, and I even learned to love waking up at 4:45 in the morning to jump in the cold pool in the dead of winter and do this, day in and day out. When I reached the national level, I started training in a way that was centered on the Olympics. So the 4 years preceding an Olympic Games was called an Olympic training cycle. And so part of that cycle included going to big competitions to swim against really amazing competitors. So in early 2017, I just turned 20 and I flew down to Indianapolis to compete in the Pro Swim Series, a competition that brought together some of the best swimmers in the world. And when I was there, I unfortunately got the flu. I had a cough, I had a fever, I just wasn't feeling so great, and so my performances suffered. And I thought, these things happen. I just have to push through, give my best shot, and I'll do better next time. After that competition, I went down to Florida for a training camp, and things were not going so well for me. I was completely exhausted, I wasn't swimming well, and I didn't really know what to make of it, but I just thought, I just need to get home, sleep in my own bed, eat some home-cooked food, and everything will just sort of set back into place on its own. So I got home, and that's not what happened. Actually, things were getting worse. I was getting weaker and weaker. I was not making the times I should be making in the water. I wasn't feeling so great. And one day, I started feeling some tingling in my toes. And I thought, that's pretty weird. That's a strange sensation that you don't get every day. But I wasn't too alarmed. A few days later, that tingling had started spreading into my feet, and it appeared in my fingers. And so I got home one day, and I went to unlock my front door. And as I did, my fingers just crumbled around the key. I didn't have the strength in my fingers to even hold the key in place. And that's when I was really alarmed for the first time. I thought, this is strange, something weird is going on, and I wasn't quite sure yet what it was. So a few more days went by, and the numbness and the tingling that I started to feel in my feet and in my fingers had now turned into numbness. And that numbness was creeping up my feet, up my legs, up my arms. And with that numbness came weakness and eventually pain. On March 23rd, 2017, less than 3 weeks after I'd competed in Indianapolis, I walked into the ER, not knowing that I wouldn't leave the hospital for the months to come, because by the end of that day, I would lose the ability to stand altogether. That night, I was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré Syndrome, or GBS for short. And GBS is an autoimmune disorder in which the immune system attacks the nerves in our body, the nerves that bring the information from our brain to our bodies and back to our brains. And so my immune system, the doctors thought, had been triggered by this infection that I had when I was in Indianapolis, that flu. And my immune system had been attacking my nerves, causing these symptoms that I'd been feeling. GBS is a very rare disease, and when it does appear, there's actually a range that it can appear in. So some people will just feel tingling or weakness, and that can progress to a more severe disease that can lead to complete paralysis and ventilation because the muscles that we use to breathe are paralyzed as well. So how do we treat GBS? Well, the goal of the treatment is really to stop the immune system. We're trying to stop a faulty immune response that's destroying the nerves. How do we do that? One of the main ways that's done, and that's the treatment that I received, is called intravenous immunoglobulins, or IVIG. And IVIG is quite an interesting drug, actually, because it's derived from healthy people. So what we do is we take a healthy donor, they take the plasma, which is the liquid component in the blood, and from that plasma they extract healthy antibodies, or immunoglobulins. And then they take those immunoglobulins and they give a high dose intravenously to patients like me. And by doing so, we can hit the reset button on the immune system, stop the immune response that's destroying the nerves, and allow the slow process of the nerve regeneration to happen. So we're stopping the immune response, allowing the nerves to start healing again. And that means that for some patients who are completely paralyzed, 1 year later, they seem completely normal. They've healed from that disease, and they can live a normal, healthy life. So once I was diagnosed, I was sent to the Montreal Neurological Hospital, or the Neuro, and the Neuro was kind of an ironic place to be sent, because as an immunology student, I was now facing this autoimmune disease, and on top of that, I was being hospitalized in the very building where I'd been going to class, taking exams and studying. And there's this bridge at the Neuro that connects the hospital building to the old Royal Victoria Hospital. And that bridge overlooks University Street. So I found myself a few times on that bridge, and I would look out the window and I saw sort of the hustle and bustle of students coming and going, to class, to the gym, heading home, going to grab lunch with friends. And it really created the sense of the outside world and the inside world, where I was now behind these walls. And there was this rift between the outside world, and with that outside world, I associated everything that I'd been up until then, a student, an athlete. GBS was particularly cruel because it was slowly taking away my body, and I felt robbed of all the hard work that I put into my sport. I felt robbed of the ability to swim and of the opportunity to carry out my passion. I received my IVIG for a week at the Neuro. And after that week, I was kept under observation to see if the immune response had stopped, if I was stabilizing. One morning after that first treatment, I woke up super early. It must have been around the time that my friends were waking up to head to the pool for practice. And I woke up in excruciating pain, and it turns out that my condition was worsening still. I remember very distinctly that the weight of the bedsheet on my chest made it hard for me to breathe, and that's how weak I had gotten. I was now almost completely bedbound. So we decided to do a second treatment of IVIG, so another week. And then after that, we got some good news. The disease had stopped, and by then, I was not doing great, obviously, but at least I saw that as a sign. This is my green light to start my recovery. And so for this phase, they sent me to a rehab center. When I got to the rehab center, they brought me to my room for the first time, and there was this mirror. And really, for the first time since I'd been diagnosed, I looked at myself, and I didn't recognize the person that was looking back. I'd lost over 40 pounds, and more than just physically, I changed on the inside as well. When I got to the rehab center, one of the key questions that I had was, how am I going to overcome this situation that I'm in now? And it turns out that the answer to that was pretty straightforward. I just thought, I'm going to apply everything that I'd learned as a high-level athlete to my recovery. I'm going to be persistent, I'm going to be consistent, I'm going to put everything that I have, 100% every day, into my rehabilitation. So physiotherapy, occupational therapy. And so the first week, the goal was to get from the bed to the wheelchair on my own. After 1 week, I was able to do that. I was like, great, I hope everything else goes this way. After 2 weeks, the goal was to get from the wheelchair into crutches. And when I was able to do that, then I thought, okay, Now that I have the crutches, I need to be able to walk independently. After a few weeks, I was able to do that, although I was a little wobbly at first. And that's when they told me I could finally go home. And that was a great day. I felt so relieved that it was maybe all behind me. I was finally going to get back into the outside world as I saw it. And when I left the rehab center, the first thing that I did was head straight for the pool. So this picture, I love this picture. I think it just captures the joy that I felt that day of, the whole recovery process having gone so well. I was back in my element. But it doesn't capture everything that was really going on the inside. Because although physically I was doing really well, I was still struggling on the inside. I had all this turmoil of what had happened to me, what it meant, and where I was going from now. I felt like the strings of my experience were tied up in a knot that I couldn't untangle. I was in the dark. And so the question that I'd asked myself of how am I going to overcome this situation had changed. Now I was asking myself, how am I going to bring sense to a senseless experience? How am I going to bring meaning to an inherently meaningless experience of suffering and disease? Because there can be a how we get a disease, but there's never a why. And so a year and a half went by. And during that year and a half, I just went along with everything that I wanted to do. I went back to school. I even went back to swimming. But internally, I was still struggling with these questions of sense and meaning. And one day, I was telling my friend about it. And I was recounting everything I'd gone through, all the feelings, all the thoughts I had. And she looked at me and she said something that's stayed with me even to this day. And she simply said, "So what are you going to do about it?" And for some reasons, something clicked in my head. And shortly after that conversation, I contacted the hospital where I'd been a patient, where I'd been hospitalized. And I told them, I want to start a fundraiser for your physiotherapy department. And so we got together and we collaborated. We spoke to the physiotherapists and other healthcare providers at the hospital. We identified needs and we launched this fundraiser. And so we've been having it every year since. And we've not only supported the physiotherapy department, but also the patient resource center, where patients can go and learn about their diseases and their treatments. A year after launching that first initiative, I still felt like I wasn't really doing justice to the unique perspective that I'd gained having survived a rare disease. And so I contacted the GBS CIDP Foundation of Canada, a fantastic organization aiming to support, educate, and advocate for patients with rare neurological diseases like the one I had, like GBS. Today, I'm the Quebec director of the GBS CIDP Foundation of Canada. And it's truly a privilege to meet other patients who are recently diagnosed with diseases like GBS and to offer them support to make sure that they're not going through this alone. As part of the foundation, we're also organizing conferences to make sure that patients and family members and caretakers have all the information that they need to get through their conditions. We're also making sure that healthcare providers know about our rare diseases and are able to identify them quickly and accurately when they see them in the clinic so that our patients can get the adequate treatment in a timely manner. If you remember the IVIG treatments that I got, we're also engaged in advocacy surrounding these treatments. So IVIG, like I mentioned, is derived from plasma from healthy donors. And according to Health Canada, 70% of the plasma used in Canada today actually comes from the US. Health Canada also estimates that our demand for plasma will increase 5 to 10% every year. Our reliance on plasma from the US is a significant risk to the supply for these life-saving plasma-derived drugs. And that's why our foundation is advocating for a safe and reliable supply of plasma in Canada. So, I may not have an answer for why I got GBS, but I know that using my experience to help others has meant that maybe it wasn't all for nothing. Each of us, at one point or another, will face adversity or a seemingly insurmountable challenge. And while our instinct might be to turn inwards, I encourage each of you to turn outwards, to put your experience to the service of others. And in doing so, you'll discover new passions that will lead you out of the dark. Thank you.